What's up, everybody? Welcome to episode 2 of the ImagineSJ web series, where we chat with San Jose creatives about their creative process, their work, and give you, the viewer, tips on how to tap into your inner artist. My name is Damone Carter. I am a rapper, arts advocate, podcaster, lifelong San Josean, and the host of this program. We have a really cool guest on the program today. I'm going to read his bio, because that's always really embarrassing when an artist comes on and you just read their bio word for word. So I'm going to do that now to give you an idea of the amazing person we're about to talk to. Today's guest is a well-traveled stand-up poet and storyteller from San Jose, California. In the world of Poetry Slam, he is the first to win both the 2003 National Poetry Slam Individual Grand Championship and the 2006 Individual World Poetry Slam Grand Championship. He has toured very extensively through the United States, Canada, and Europe. Since 2002, he's covered several 100,000 miles performing his brand of poetry and humor. He has been featured on HBO's Def Poetry Jam, CBC Radio and Television, and NPR's Snap Judgment. He was one of the first Americans to perform spoken word at the University of Paris, La Sorbonne, in 2005. He was appointed Poet Laureate for Santa Clara County. Mike Mcgee's first collection of humor and poetry, In Search of Midnight, we have copies here, is available through Right Bloody Publishing. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to welcome to ImagineSJ, Mike Mcgee.
Hello.
Mike.
Thank you, Damone.
Good to see you, man.
Good to see you, too.
Yeah, welcome to the program. I want to start it off real light. Okay?
Yeah.
Mike, why poetry?
Poetry was and is a means for me to honestly speak to the part of me that the class clown couldn't in middle school and high school. There was a period of time in my life where I desperately just wanted to make as many human beings laugh as possible. But I realized that what ends up happening there is that you sort of create this vacuum where seriousness and emotion isn't allowed when only humor is taking place. When you go to a comedy club, if suddenly a comedian gets very, very serious, it kind of sucks the air out of the room. Mm-hmm. That's not what it's there for, and I didn't want to just do that. I've always identified with the comedy and tragedy masks, and I never knew why, and now I know why, and part of that is thanks to poetry.
So when did it become real for you? I'm not sure if there's too many young folks that say, hey, I'm going to grow up and be a poet, but when did you realize that this was your life's path, and kind of what was that like?
In October of 2000.
Oh, okay.
And the reason I say that is because I used to do poetry slam competitions through the late 90s into the early 2000s very heavily, as my bio sort of explained. And I was very bad at it, very bad
Is that right?
I just wasn't connecting with the audience in the way that I could have.
Okay.
I didn't understand how to write for myself, but also write for the stage, write for the people who were listening. And I ended up at the Oakland Poetry Slam at Mambo Mambo, which was it was also the first time I ever had Jamaican food. So I remember that day very vividly because I can always pair it with food. Memories and food, easy.
Go together.
There was a gentleman there who, just a legend in our community, in the Poetry Slam community, named Mac Dennis, a fantastic spoken word artist, and I won the Oakland Slam, and it was the first time I'd ever won a Poetry Slam. Okay. And I stepped outside, I was still smoking at the time, and I lit a cigarette, and Mac was already outside smoking a cigarette. Don't smoke, people. Do not smoke. It's bad. And I step outside, I light my cigarette, I just won the slam, and Mac turns to me and goes, I didn't know you slammed. And it was his way of saying congratulations. It was his way of...
You've arrived a little bit?
Yeah, this 60-something-year-old man who's seen more things than I could ever possibly imagine, is now acknowledging my existence. And it just felt really good. And from that moment on, I realized, I want to do this as long as I possibly can. I left every band I was in. Yeah. I left everything I was doing so that I could focus on performance poetry. from
Yeah,
that point on.
and it seems to be working out. You've done a bunch of impressive things. I had a great experience one day, randomly going down a deaf comedy, deaf poetry jam, a rabbit hole, and like, there's Mike Mcgee, which you guys should definitely check out on YouTube.
It's
one day.
especially if you want to see me with just a goatee and no glasses.
Yeah, it was early Mike Mcgee, which the
Yeah.
kids on the street say the early Mike Mcgee
Yeah,
was the best.
OG McGee.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So, but your poetry, as you alluded to earlier, was like a response to being a class clown and trying to fill that void. And now you've developed this style that blends both poetry and comedy. You refer to yourself as a stand-up poet. How did that come about? When did you decide to kind of openly embrace both those pieces?
I realized in poetry slams, or just in performance poetry in general, it was very unusual to see someone win a slam with humor. It seemed to be that you had to be very serious in order to win. Sure. Otherwise, you didn't earn it. You didn't earn that win. And so I was just sort of determined to be as poignant as I could be. I was very determined because I felt as though that comedy had a place, humor had a place on those stages. It needed to be, because when you walk into a poetry event, a poetry slam, what have you, especially performance poetry, especially competition, you are dealing with poem after poem after poem of some pretty heavy stuff. Some pretty emotionally charged material and content. And after 45 minutes of hearing some of the most painful things you could imagine, you want a break. And I honestly think that there were times in my poetry slam competing career that I won because I gave everyone a pressure valve, by just being funny, But I don't really write poetry anymore that tends to just be humorous. I always insert humor into everything I do, but it's usually never the foundation of the poem these days.
What is the foundation of the poem these days?
Now it's a marker, I think, of who I am in the moment and what I see in the world. It's I take in the world and then I put it back out in a way that I think is like, it's almost like say, hey, okay, you're messing up that Rubik's Cube. Here, give it to me, let me try it, and like, I've never solved a Rubik's Cube on my own, but I've gotten really close, and I feel like that's kind of what poetry is. It's me taking the world in and then trying to put it back together, at least the little snippet, the little sliver that I can.
Yeah, the world has been definitely fragmented over these past 15 or so months.
Yeah.
You're a live performer.
Yeah.
How have you managed to sustain throughout the pandemic and kind of the shuttering of all things live?
Honestly, I have a Zoom open mic that I do. It's private. I invite people who I think might be interested in attending, because promoting any sort of online event I feel like if you're already sitting in 2 or 3 meetings a week for work, and you're working from home, the last thing you want is to be invited to another Zoom meeting, and it kind of goes without saying. But also, I didn't realize that I needed a break from being on stage. I needed a break from organizing events. And so the last 15 months have actually been heart-wrenching yet bearable. It's just been something that is really, I've been okay not performing on stage. Now I'm very eager
to get
now
back.
I cannot wait to get back on stage. So the break was unavoidable. Like, what was I going to do? But I'm glad that I feel safer now, and I feel like now it's time to get out there. It's time to get out there and get on stage. And I'm definitely more interested in performing poetry and comedy now than I was even before the pandemic.
Really?
I think the pandemic, I think the time away from it was a nice break, but now I miss it, Distance is a great indicator and a great litmus test for the thing that you love, the whatever it is you love, whoever it is you love. You put distance between you and that thing, and sometimes it's good and healthy to have that distance. But when you know that you're done and you don't want there to be distance anymore, it's time to run back to it,
Yeah.
And it's time for me to run back to performance poetry and humor, live humor.
Okay. So let's talk about it. You are part of Poetry Center San Jose.
Correct.
And you have a festival coming up in September. Tell us about that.
Yeah. From September 11th to the 19th. We're expanding it to 9 days this year. I think that's 9 days, right? I don't math, I poem. So the thing that I'm excited about is that, and we discovered last year, in the year that shall not be named, we discovered that by moving the poetry festival to the internet, moving it to Zoom, we expanded our audience internationally, as I'm sure many different events that moved to the internet also discovered.
Sure.
We were able to draw in audiences from India and the Philippines and Ireland and Canada all at the same time. We had people waking up at 4 a.m. their time just so that they could participate in events that we were doing online. And these were just folks who were just there to watch and to listen, and it was just amazing. It's mind-blowing. To the point now where we now know, and as I'm sure many other organizations and people who run events now understand, is that Zoom will always be a part of everything we do.
Yeah.
The telecommunication aspect of our existence right now
Not going away.
is not going away, and rightfully so. Like we've discovered that we can actually open ourselves up to the rest of the world, and that's an amazing thing. That's a really pleasant thing. So the festival this year will be a mix of both. That's the hard part, is negotiating the idea that we can book a venue, but then if for whatever reason we have to cancel, it's really easy to just move to Zoom, back to Zoom.
Sure.
But if we book Zoom and suddenly realize we want to put this in a live venue, we need to get that venue months in advance. So we're really trying to find the balance between live events and Zoom events. But it's exciting because we are able to expand it to 9 days or whatever the amount of days that is, and really just explore what poetry means to San Jose and how that reflects back out into the world. So, yeah, PCSJ.org is a great place to discover more about those dates.
Absolutely. I'm going to take it back a little bit. This is a question I asked on the first episode of ImagineSJ. You're a San Jose guy. You've traveled around the world. You keep coming back for reasons that are not clear to me. No, because we love you and you love San Jose. What San Jose intersection is the center of your universe? When you think about coming home, what are the two streets that intersect that are like the center for you?
My immediate response is probably first in San Carlos.
Oh,
because that is what we refer to here in San Jose as the SOFA district, the South of First area, South of First Arts District. And I think it's because that's where my poetry, my live performance career and interests were born and where they continue to develop.
yeah.
I have performed on pretty much in every building I can think of downtown.
Yeah.
But that's really an artistic home to me. But then I also think about my actual intersection where I live currently, also downtown. And it changes. I think that intersection does change from time to time. When I was a kid, it was, Lawrence Expressway and 101 because that's where my grandma lived,
Yeah.
I'd have to say first in San Carlos.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You were a child of the sofa.
I am. Well, I love to sit, so
It's
it
on
makes
brand
sense.
for you.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
It
Absolutely.
fits. I really love it, and I think that because I have to think what intersection am I most invested in, right? Which one is the one that I would like, it would kill me to see it change completely.
Sure.
It behoove me to help preserve it, you know? And that's definitely one of them, you know? Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about the poetry scene in San Jose as somebody who's traveled and kind of gotten to interact in different spaces? What is the poetry scene in San Jose about, and why is it special?
The poetry scene in San Jose it goes through periods of being very fractured. I think because we live in such a tech-heavy environment.
Sure.
If you're in Silicon Valley, and I will say this too, anyone watching, no artist lovingly refers to this place as Silicon Valley.
True that.
That is a term that only businesses use,
Right.
and media. But it is also sort of a pin on the map of where we are in the world physically,
Sure.
Our region. So I think that because San Jose has always had a little bit of a chip on its shoulder as sort of the older big brother, but much less popular than its, you know, younger, smaller sibling, San Francisco. Younger and smaller, right? Heavy emphasis on those. I'm italicizing those with my voice.
Absolutely.
Right? So I think that because the poetry community in San Francisco has historically always been a little stronger, maybe even a lot stronger at certain points, considering that's sort of where the beat generation really kind of got their start.
Right.
I think a lot of folks don't realize that San Jose was a part of that. But that got lost because San Jose goes through so many different identities over the course of every generation. It seems as though we have a different identity. What we think of as Silicon Valley was not Silicon Valley in the 70s,
No.
and it wasn't really until maybe the late 80s. And poetry has always had a place here. It's just that I think a lot of poets realized that there was not going to be a whole lot of support because there was just so many more important things to do in terms of making money and what have you with companies here in San Jose. That I think that poetry has just never had much of a dramatic importance.
Okay.
And I think that culturally it has always fallen by the wayside for more important things, or the poets that were creating that poetry, the writers who were writing those words that needed to be written here in San Jose, eventually ended up in San Francisco or Oakland or Chicago or LA
Right.
or New York or somewhere else in the world, because San Jose has never been a place that has embraced the arts in the way other cities have. And so poetry falls into that too. Now, we're seeing a major shift. I think poetry has been more popular in San Jose in the last 5 years than probably ever.
Oh, I would totally agree with that.
Which is awesome. There's a great young community of young youth poets. You know, Santa Clara County just established the first, thanks to our current adult poet laureate,
Yes.
Janice Lobo-Sapigao. She started the first ever Santa Clara County Youth Poet Laureate program, and the turnout for that was immense. The amount of young people who applied for that position was extraordinary. I don't think that would have happened in 2005.
Okay.
I don't think that would have happened in 1996.
For sure.
You know, so it's a product of this era. It's a product of the oncoming generation.
And you know, you probably wouldn't say this, but I would say your efforts as a events organizer and as well as somebody who did ply your trade in other cities and such, but came back to San Jose is definitely a major part of that.
And I appreciate you saying that, and I am honored to hear it. And yes, that has always been, I can't deny that, yes, that has always been my goal.
Yeah.
And anytime I've lived elsewhere, anytime I've moved somewhere else, I always made sure that it was a slightly crappier place, slightly, you know, so that I wouldn't stay, you know. And
We won't name names, but yes.
I won't name names, Worcester, Mass, Portland, Oregon, because that's how they sound in Portland.
Really?
Yeah, they have like their accent is so Chicago, it's crazy. Portland, Oregon, the Bears. Like they root for Chicago teams. It's crazy.
Huh.
You never.
I've heard of this Portland place.
You never know.
It's,
Yeah, Portland,
yeah.
Portland, Maine. Portland, Maine. No, I'm kidding. I'm just kidding. I've lived in Portland. I've lived in Bellingham, Washington, and I've lived in Worcester, Massachusetts, and they're lovely places.
Yeah.
You know, and I went there because their poetry communities were very strong.
Right.
And then I obliterated them and came back to San Jose.
That's right.
know.
The conquering lion of poetry that you are.
Yeah.
But as you mentioned, you also have a comedic streak. So what I want you to do right now is give me your 5th best pun.
My 5th best pun.
Yeah, just to show the strength of your pun catalog.
Oof, gosh. Can I curse?
Sure.
All right.
Sure.
Just remember, a fart is just some asshole talking shit behind your back. That's probably my favorite.
Is it?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
That might be my favorite, but I didn't write that.
You did.
I added the tag on it, the behind your back part, but
Yeah.
that's
But you create puns.
I do create puns, but I for whatever reason I can't think of one right now.
The pun community is a little let down right now.
The what community?
The pun community.
Oh, sure, but they're
The Puniverse, if you will.
yeah. So glad you pronounced that way, because
There's a lot of ways that could have went.
a lot of ways that could have gone.
Talk to me about your weirdest show experience ever. You've done quite a few shows.
Okay.
What is your weirdest
Yes,
show experience?
I have that story for you. Weirdest show ever. Quinnipiac University in Connecticut, I think.
Okay.
I think it's in Connecticut. They're known for polls. A Quinnipiac poll did the blah 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 blah. You know, like whenever you're watching elections.
Okay.
Election
Oh,
coverage,
polls.
they
I
always
thought you
do-
meant like
Oh,
polls.
yeah.
No,
they-
like election polls. Okay.
Yeah, election polls.
Okay.
Not
Dancing polls.
Not special dancer polls.
Got it.
So the English department connected with the Black Student Union and said, we want to bring Mike Mcgee to come perform poetry at the school, but we don't have enough funding to bring him. Is there a way that we could partner up to make this happen? And so they said, yeah, we have a fashion show coming up, and so we could put him in the fashion show.
Absolutely.
And I was like, yeah, a guy who only wears Dickie shorts from the 90s definitely needs to be a part of this event. So I agreed to the event. I signed the contract. I show up at Quinnipiac University, and there are 200 gorgeous students hanging out in this weird amphitheater, and they've built a catwalk in the middle of the space, and there's all these tables in the very, very back, right? And this catwalk. And the fashion show was really just the students who were part of a couple of different organizations had rated their closets for their best clothes.
Okay.
And then put together some ensembles.
Okay.
So whenever I do a show, they usually read my bio or say a little bit about me from San Jose, California, and I've always had them announce San Jose, nowhere else. And then they'll say, and now please welcome Mighty Mike Mcgee or Mike Mcgee, right? So the fashion show just keeps dragging on, and it's really just about the students watching their friends come up and down the catwalk in less and less clothing as the night progresses. And I'm just waiting. They're supposed to have like an intermission.
Sure.
And then they're going, as soon as the intermission is over, they're going to call me up to perform. Well, the host, who clearly, like when I approach and say, hi, I'm Mike, I introduce myself, I find the English department who wanted me there. And they're excited. There's like 6 of them, part of the English department, and they're super excited that I'm there. And so the host is like, oh, you're Mike? Okay. Well, I'm gonna call you up in like 20 more minutes. I was like, okay. Well, another hour goes by. Finally, and I'm waiting, and it is just a skin show. the students are just there to see their fellow hot students almost naked. And so finally, I see them, a group of students bring in all these Subway sandwiches, right? They went to Subway and they bought like 100 sandwiches cut into like thirds, and they were stacking them in the
Very
back.
collegiate.
Yeah.
Yes.
Then somebody comes over to me and is just like, okay, we're going to be calling you up like real quick. And they go, and I'm only supposed to do like 15, 20 minutes of poetry. The girl gets up on stage, the host, and she goes, all right, everyone, real quick, we got a special surprise for you. We've bought Subway sandwiches for everyone, right? So just go ahead and help yourselves in the back. And I mean, 200 students get up and just make a mad dash for all these sandwiches. And then they're like, and now, for some poetry, give it up for Mike. That was my intro, and I now have to compete with everyone chewing and talking. And it was the worst event of it was definitely one of the worst events. Now, I don't drink anymore, and that's a very good thing, but I've done a couple of shows where it was my fault that the show was bad because me and Jack Daniels had some fun.
Yeah.
So, but that was the worst, like, where I did my best and no one noticed.
It just bombed, and, and nobody
bad.
cared.
There was like 2 students who were like listening, probably because they were vegetarian, and so they were just like, yeah, this guy's, he's all right,
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, well, he's so much shorter in person.
Bad poetry is one of the worst things ever. Like it's right up there with like bad comedy and bad boxing. What
I would
makes
say it's worse. I would say bad
potentially
poetry is worse.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What makes bad poetry? Like there's this kind of like canned characterization of the spoken word poet.
Absolutely.
Like what are the ingredients of a really bad performed poem?
Monotony, redundancy, just right off the bat. Monotony and redundancy for sure. A tone deafness, and what I mean by that is kind of really not reading the room, not really understanding who you're performing for, and so I'm just going to regurgitate the thing that I'm feeling right now, whether you like it or not. I feel like there are a number of poets who write and perform for one person. I'm going to write an angry poem about my ex, but I'm going to direct it to my ex. You said that we would be together forever, and guess what? Well, forever isn't even here yet, and neither are you. Actually, that's even better than bad poetry.
I was about to say, you made
right
that
off
work,
the top
bro.
of my head, I'm actually very. Can you please make sure you get a copy of that to me?
Absolutely.
Because goddamn, I'm great. No, but in all seriousness, I can't even do a bad poem. No, but I think that what ends up happening is that people write from a place of what they've heard as opposed to what they're actually feeling. Okay. And I also think that bad poetry usually comes from people who don't read poetry. If you don't read poetry, it'd be like it would be like trying to be a country singer but never listening to country music. Right. Trying to be a rapper without ever listening to hip hop. Right. Trying to be a dancer without ever watching anyone dance. If you don't read poetry, you're not going to be able to write it very well. I don't think it's going to come from a very genuine place. It's going to come from a place where you're making assumptions about your audience, the people who are going to read it. If it's so personal that I can't connect with it, I'm glad you were able to get it off your chest, but I'm going to always be curious as to whether or not it actually worked for you. Okay. Bad poetry is a curse on the world. It really is because
it's a scourge.
Because it has it already has a bad reputation as it is. Up until I was 22 years old, I thought poetry was the most boring thing in the world. Yeah. And then I heard performance poetry by some very angry people in their late teens and early 20s. And it blew my mind. I don't write like that anymore. I don't perform like that anymore. But I'm grateful that I got a taste of it back then because it's helped to make me into the artist that I am now. And anyone who doesn't evolve with the art form is losing out. You're losing out. You're going to be stuck. You're going to be stuck forever. You know, I just can't imagine going through this world without poetry. I really can't. And while I think bad poetry sucks, I also think that anyone who writes poetry, I also kind of want to pat them on the back, be like, well, at least you're trying.
It's courageous.
Yeah.
Yeah, no,
It really
it's
is.
definitely courageous to
Yeah.
stand up sans, you know,
Yeah.
instruments and other things and say, here are my thoughts.
Yeah, it's the equivalent of getting on the bus with a tutu, you know. It's just like I'm
And
gonna
working-
own it.
Yeah,
I'm gonna own it.
own it,
know?
and
Here's how I feel inside.
and
It's
that was a wonderful bus ride with
Yeah.
you in your tutu. Talk to me about you've got a big idea for a festival that you want to bring to San Jose,
Yeah,
called the Fringe.
the San Jose Fringe Festival, FRINGE.
Okay.
Fringe Festival.
What is the Fringe?
Imagine about a week, maybe 2 weeks, a dozen to 24 venues selected
Okay.
who partner with us, and then we would then create a schedule where we would then fill in blocks of performers, and then performers from around the world would apply to be in our festival.
I see.
You have a theater experience that you're not going to book in a larger venue. That it's very black box theater.
Experimental theater spread out about the city.
Or you're a band that doesn't generally get booked because you're too thematic. You know.
Interesting. Okay.
You know, Harry and the Potters. You know, you're you know that's a band. That's a real band. Say what you will about that, but it is, you know, but you're a very niche band or a very niche act, you know, and you want to be able to perform over the course of a week or 4 shows, 6 shows, 12 shows. You would apply, and then a panel of people that are part of the San Jose Fringe Festival, the SJFF, would book.
The
based
Board
on
of
that, and curate.
Strangeness would then
A Board of Strangeness within Strange Jose.
select.
Yeah.
Strange Jose. You heard it here first on ImagineSJ.
It's the first time I've ever said it. Feels good.
Owning, so it's kind of about, you said this before, owning our weirdness as a town, right?
It is. We desperately need to.
Yeah.
We desperately need to, because I think one of the things that we've really struggled with, and I said this, I kind of touched on this earlier about San Jose, is that our identity changes so often.
Yeah.
And it's always based on whatever our gross domestic product is, right? Initially it was orchards,
Right,
you know?
right.
Well, and before that it was, you know, colonizing. But now we are, you know, now we're in the throes of, it's not even hardware anymore, really.
No,
You know, now it's
no.
all software. It's all apps. It's
Yeah.
all small technologies.
Sure.
You know, amazing, powerful technologies.
Sure.
We are, you know, hey, you're welcome, world. Here's your
Yeah,
internet.
about to say, yeah.
Yeah.
The
Hey.
gel in your iPhone comes from here, but there's more, right? And I think
There is more.
you mentioned earlier that none of us, especially in the creative community, really use the term Silicon Valley unless we're writing a grant, right? So there's another identity and another scene that exists underneath that.
Without a doubt.
And you are, I'm going to call you the Prime Minister of Strange Jose.
I would gladly wear that T-shirt.
Yes.
Gladly. You know, it's wow, PMS. It makes sense for us, to me.
Mm-hmm.
It makes sense for us to take on that identity because it's already there.
It's here.
It's
Yeah.
already here, and like so many of the people I know who've decided to stay in San Jose and make their home here, whether they were born here, whether they were raised here, or whether they transferred here, were transplanted here. I think that they've stayed because this is such a strange place. And it's a bit of artistically, it's a bit of a blank canvas. Every time our identity shifts because of our export, whatever that export might be, every time our identity shifts, it's sort of an etch-a-sketch to the artistic community, right?
This program, ImagineSJ, is all about letting folks know about the great,
Yes.
creative culture here in San Jose, but also about how they can tap into their own creativity. And in addition to being, somehow this is not on the paper, but in addition to being an amazing poet performer, you also teach quite a bit, working with the youths.
Yes.
And I wonder if you can share with our viewers what's a tip or a technique that folks can use in their everyday lives to kind of get more in touch with their creativity.
One way that I would recommend is sit with yourself for a moment, and whether you meditate or you focus with sort of a pinpoint accuracy as to how you're feeling in the moment. And so, for example, yesterday I went to a funeral of a dear friend, and I came home after that and was thinking about tragedies and things that have been happening around here and nationally and internationally, and just sort of the weight of 15 months. It all hit me in that meditative session at the funeral, thinking about my friend, thinking about the world, and I thought, I feel so lonely in this moment. And I went home, I laid in bed, I cuddled with my cat. The sun was still up. It was just setting. It was early evening. And I sat in bed and I thought, I feel very lonely, but I feel a lot of love right now. What would I do without this loneliness? What could I achieve without this loneliness? So, what I recommend to folks is when you really want to get something off your chest, think about the thing that is most heavy on your mind. Name it: loneliness, love, fear, lust, thirst, whatever. Think about that thing, name it, and then ask yourself, what would I do without this right now? What could I achieve without this? And start making a list. Make a list of what you could achieve without that thing. Or make a list of what you can't achieve without
Because of that thing.
Because of that thing, And then from that list, I want you to take those items on that list, and I want you to expand on them. I want you to really write out man, I could be doing this and this and this and this. If you don't uplift yourself, you're going to uplift someone else just by sharing that list. Guaranteed. And I think it's just a good start. What could I do without this feeling? What could I do without this thing I'm naming,
Okay.
That's a start. That's a prompt that I think anyone could really get something out of, especially if you like lists.
Yeah, who doesn't like a good list? We appreciate you sharing that as an exercise for our viewing audience here. Mike, I can't have you on and not have you do at least one poem.
Sure.
To share with our audience here. You got some to kick for the people?
Absolutely. This poem is called I Mailed Myself a Love Letter Yesterday. I mailed myself a love letter yesterday, and I can't wait to get back to see what's going on in my life and to see how my relationship with myself is developing. Yesterday, I learned of all my faults and casualties. Tomorrow, I'll come to grips with how great I am. And next week, I'll begin teaching courses in coolness where water can enroll itself to learn how to become ice cubes. I'm 45 years old, which means that I can run for president, which means that I could bring back facial hair as the symbol of a good leader. I could be the first president of the United States of America to get elected without a campaign budget. Instead, I would use the help of small woodland animals who actually control the winds of change. I mean, think about it. If you saw a squirrel wearing an I Like Mike bumper sticker, you would vote for me. The White House will serve ramen noodles 24 hours a day on tap, because I'm going to be busy. Yesterday, I felt like a singer with a song I couldn't sing. Today, I'm a father who can never have children. And tomorrow rests inside a full night of sleep for a planet of billions of lovers and fighters who love to fight about everyone else on the planet. I promised myself many years ago that I would always put things down on paper, whether it was in letters to women who never knew I loved them or in memos written on Post-it notes stuck to the lockers of bullies demanding their immediate surrender. It's not easy to convince a table of nerds to fight without a 20-sided die, but I'm going to keep trying. I promised myself a very long time ago that I would never settle for average or mediocre, and that I would always try to find the best and the worst within myself so that maybe I'd be able to work the two out so they could learn from each other. It's one thing to say that I'm worthy of love, but it's another thing to say that I'm worthy of my own. Because here I am, alone, with all this love to give, and it seems as though I'm still trying to find myself so I know who to give it to. You see, like a lot of you, maybe even everyone watching, I too have lived a life with such varied confidence. So I mailed myself a love letter yesterday. It was just a dress rehearsal, so that I'd know how to respond to the people who told me that I'm ugly, or I'm a great friend, or I'm just like one of the girls. I've learned to deal with it. But now it's time to play with the hands that I've been dealt. I know I'm not tall, dark, and handsome, but 2 out of 3 ain't bad. Now you're probably wondering which 2 I'm talking about. But I only need one woman to figure that out on her own. Most women say all they really want is a man with a good sense of humor, right? Liars! All of them. But in reality, I'm just the right height for a man who loves life. When you stack badass at 5 feet 6 inches, I'm all you need. And if I'm going to find someone who digs me with life's biggest shovel, then I'm just going to have to learn to dig myself first.